right, well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Chair. And I want to come back to the issue at hand, which is how the committee is going to conduct its business over the next several weeks. But I thought I might start just by sharing some observations about things that have been said around the table today. I noted one member in particular expressed concern about wasting time. And I'm wondering if people that are watching at home or who will consult the record at some point in the future will feel that we've done a good job of taking to heart any meaningful concern about wasting time. It was my frustration at the end of last meeting that we didn't come up with a plan for what to do at this meeting, and it's an ongoing frustration that we're sitting around the table blowing off steam, you know, which is not an illegitimate thing to do around Parliament Hill, but it has its time and its place. And I'd rather be blowing off steam in the context of a productive study of something and not a kind of open-ended conversation about what we're going to put on the agenda for subsequent meetings, because it seems to me that that is not the level at which we should have intractable dispute around this table. So I'll start just by signaling that and saying that I'm anxious for us to come to some kind of conclusion on what the path forward is going to be for the committee, because I think we'll be doing more productive work, which will include an exploration of many of the same questions that members have been exploring here today, if we're doing it in the context of a proper study. I know some members said that the legislation isn't out of the House. That's certainly true. They say they don't feel ready to undertake a study. I would say, given the number of comments made about the content of the Fall Economic Statement and the legislation that's already been tabled in the House, it seems to me members around this table are in a pretty good position to start talking about the content of the bill. In fact, they are talking about the content of the bill. My question is, why can't we just do that in the context of a study of the bill? And then it would actually count towards our formal study and the conclusions that we will ultimately draw, whatever they may be, about the legislation. We could be doing that, and not only could we be doing that in the context of a formal study, but we could do that with the benefit of having other people at the table than just ourselves, whether those are finance officials or whether they're stakeholders from Canadian society who have legitimate concern about the content of the bill. I think we would be having a better conversation if their input was part and parcel of what we were doing here today. And it could have been if we had come to some kind of agreement sooner about how we wanted to proceed with the study of the bill. I accept the frustration that certain members have about the idea of a pre-study. I don't think it's a great habit, but I will say, in my experience around this table in this Parliament, we have often been short on time. And it has often been a complaint later by the same folks who exhibit reticence to have pre-studies that we don't have enough time for fulsome study. Just so that there aren't any misconceptions, I'm talking specifically about the Conservatives here, who don't let debate collapse on certain bills. And then when it comes to committee, we engage in these kinds of long drawn-out conversations about what we're going to study or whether we're going to study it or whatever. And then there's usually certain deadlines, and I would say particularly when it comes to government legislation around a budget or a Fall Economic Statement, there's market-moving things in those bills that are going to have real consequences. I would say in the case of this bill, we're talking about the pandemic dividend and an increase in the corporate tax rate for financial institutions and the elimination of interest on student loans. Those are things that ought to be in place for the next tax year. And there's a limited amount of time. We're beginning a 5-week clock within which that legislation has to be passed, or it won't be in place for the following year. Not only will it not be in place for January 1st of the following year, but it won't be in place until well into the next year, because Parliament won't sit until the first Monday in January. That's where it'll start up again. So there is a reasonable time frame there. I think that it behooves committee members to be concerned about. And that means certain things for the passage of the bill through committee, and so it makes sense for us to start studying it now. A little procedural advice for members around the table: it's impossible to amend the content of a bill at second reading, so the concern that somehow the bill could change not only radically, but even just minutely, is unfounded. So I hope that members will receive that as information about parliamentary process. There are 3 types of amendments that you can move at second reading. You can have a hoist amendment, you can have a reasoned amendment, and you can have a motion of instruction to committee. Those are the 3 kinds. None of them change the content of the bill, which was previewed in the Ways and Means motion on the Friday following the economic statement. And members who aren't sure where the NDP stands on that will know that we voted in favor of that Ways and Means motion, which contained an almost identical version of the bill. You have to get approval of the Ways and Means motion in order to be able to table the legislation. We voted for the Ways and Means motion. It contained substantially the content of the legislation. Members can expect that that legislation will find its way to this committee table one way or the other with the support of the NDP. To certain members, that appears to be a contradiction. I don't think so at all. It is not a contradiction to support things that you don't think go far enough, that don't contain things that if you had your own druthers would be in there, but because you think there are other good reasons to support it. Because there are some things we're supporting in there. The Democrats support the share buyback. We support the pandemic dividend. In fact, that's one of the items that was in the supply and confidence agreement, because we felt that it was very important that financial institutions that benefited substantially from public funds during the pandemic, something that the Conservative leader loves to talk about, should be made to pay some of that money back. And that's what the pandemic dividend is about. And I've been shocked, frankly, at the silence of the Conservative leader on an initiative that is meant to take that very same public money he likes to complain about out of the pockets of financial institutions and deliver it back to Canadians. Not so that it can go to government largesse, and there are real concerns about largesse when it comes to this government, but so that it can go to fund things like the GST rebate that had all party support, I might add, something that New Democrats were fighting for a long time, something that wasn't clear when Bill C-30 was initially tabled, Conservatives would support, and you finally did, and I appreciate that. That was a good thing. But we also believe that you have to have money to pay for it. I hear Conservatives talk about government getting a lot of money and government largesse. Other times they talk about the fact the government still has a large deficit and a huge debt. Well, where do you think paying down the deficit is going to come from if it ain't going to come from revenue? So when we're talking about things like a pandemic dividend that directly target the people that got away with more money than they should have in order to bring it back into government coffers that don't have a balanced budget, that's called tackling a problem. It's not called largesse. It's not called socialism. It's not called whatever other kinds of propagandist terms people would like to use. It's good policy, and it's about actually figuring out a way to solve the problem instead of trying to complain your way into government without actually proposing any real solutions. So that's why we're willing to support this legislation, because we think there are things in there that will actually make a difference, and we recognize that that support has to be timely in order for it to make a difference to Canadians, which is why I'm willing to put aside my normal reservations about pre-studies and get on with it, because I'd like to hear from other people across the country what they think about that legislation and see if there are opportunities to make it better with enough time to actually make it better, instead of just complaining more about how we didn't have time to make it better. And that's a responsibility of members at this committee in order to be able to get on with it. And with all due respect, it's not the same as private members' bills, which are important, and that, you know, I support a lot of the private members' business that comes to this table. But it's not like because we're going to engage in a pre-study for a major government bill that involves one of their 2 basic financial documents for the year, that all of a sudden Pandora's box is going to get opened up and we should be pre-studying every piece of legislation that comes through the House. It's a different kind of bill with a different kind of consequence and a different kind of timetable. So that's why I'm prepared to support a pre-study at the table. I'm also prepared to do it in a way that offers Conservatives some of what they said they want around this table, including a prompt return to the study of Bill 241 after we've concluded this business, because I do think it's important that this table take private members' business seriously and that it do it in the right way. So I'm happy to add that to the mix. If it means we can get some agreement, I think that would be a very good thing. I also note that Conservatives have a motion which may not yet be formally on notice, but it's been talked about at this table in respect of inviting the finance minister again and the governor of the Bank of Canada. I've expressed my willingness to support that. I think that's a good thing. But this meeting is a meeting where we could have been doing some of that stuff. And I am frustrated that we're having another meeting where we're all chit-chatting about the many things we'd like to do around this table and not doing any of it. So let's figure out how we move forward. If there's a way to include in the motion returning promptly to 241, if there's a way to have an agreement that will deal promptly with the motion that the conservative finance critic has put forward at some point and then schedule a time to deal with that, that's great. But let's create a package that allows us to have a plan for the next 9 meetings that we have between now and Christmas. So we're actually doing work and we're getting these things done. There is enough time for people to get enough things done that matter to them that I think we can work this out. But we're going to have to do better than we've done today, or we're going to burn another meeting on Wednesday, and all the more the shame. And it'll be hard to take people seriously when they're complaining about how fast things are moving and how little time they've had when we burned up 2 meetings talking about how to schedule meetings. It's ridiculous. So that's where I'm at. Those are standing offers. I hope that people around the table will take me up on them and that we'll find a resolution today so that we can do real work on Wednesday. Because I tell you, if I show up Wednesday and we're doing more of this, my mood is going to continue to degenerate. And it ain't going to be fun. Not for me and not for anybody else.